The ocean is a vast landscape of mysterious events and strange anomalies that society has tried to understand for centuries now. It seems like every couple of weeks there is a new discovery in relation to the ocean that changes the way we view the biome. I've always found ocean mysteries interesting due to how bizarre they tend to be and the surplus of theories that follows. And among all the ocean mysteries and anomalies that I've heard of, abandoned ships are the ones I find the most intriguing. I recently heard of the MV Joyita from an Instagram post discussing unsolved mysteries and decided to look into it. What I found though was one of the most interesting unsolved ocean mysteries I had ever heard of. And so, let's discuss the mysterious disappearance of the 25 passengers and crew aboard the MV Joyita. But before we can discuss the events of the mystery and the possible theories as to what happened, we must first establish a background for this merchant vessel. In 1931, Williamton Boat Works finished production on a luxury yacht paid for by the movie director Roland West. Shortly after this, Roland West named the 69-foot wooden ship after his wife, Jewel Carmen, calling it Joyita due to its translation in Spanish being Little Jewel. The ship's hull was constructed with 2-inch thick cedar on oak frames, the reason for them choosing cedar being that it possesses excellent physical properties such as high strength to weight ratio, resistance to decay, and its durability. The MV Joyita was exceptional at maintaining a steady balance while riding the ocean currents due to its construction. West kept the boat for a few years before it was sold to Milton E. Beacon in 1936, to which it made multiple trips to Mexico, and in 1939 through 1940, it traveled to the Golden Gate Air National Exposition in San Francisco. Then in October of 1941, the US Navy acquired the boat and took it to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii just 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Despite Joyita's presence at the attack, I couldn't find any record of damage caused to Joyita in relation to the bombing. While at Pearl Harbor though, Joyita was outfitted as the yard patrol boat YP-108, to which the Navy used her to patrol the Big Island of Hawaii until the end of World War II. In 1943, she ran aground and was heavily damaged, but due to the fact that the Navy needed ships due to the war effort, she was hastily repaired and sent back out on patrol. At this point, new pipework was made from galvanized iron instead of copper or brass, and in 1946, the ship was no longer needed for the Navy and most of her equipment was removed. A few years later, in 1948, Joyita was sold to the firm Lois Brothers, to which cork lining was added to the ship's hull along with the refrigeration equipment. The ship now had 2 gray marine diesel engines that provide 225 horsepower alongside 2 extra diesel engines for generators. In 1950, William Tavares became the owner but found that he had no use for the ship, so in 1952 he sold it to Dr. Catherine Luomala, a professor at the University of Hawaii. To which all I can say is imagine having that kind of money to just casually buy a boat only to sell it 2 years later. I know I wish I could do that. While owning the boat, Dr. Luomala would charter it to her friend Captain Thomas H. Dusty Miller, to which he would use the boat as a trading and fishing charter boat. And this is where our story begins. On October 3rd, 1955 at around 5 a.m., the Joyita set sail from Samoa's Apia Harbor for its 270-mile trip to the Tokelau Islands. As a side note, if I mispronounce any of the words or names in this video, I'm sorry. However, things were already off to a rocky start. Joyita was supposed to leave the harbor at noontide the previous day, but due to the port engine clutch failing, the departure had to be delayed. On top of this, Joyita left Samoa on one engine, the crew at the time thinking it would be alright due to the fact that the trip was only going to take 2 days. On the journey were 16 crew members, Captain Miller being one of them alongside 9 passengers. Amongst the passengers was Alfred Andy Dennis Parsons, a World War II surgeon on his way to perform an amputation, a government official, a copra buyer, and 2 children. In terms of cargo, the ship carried medical supplies, timber, 80 empty 45-gallon oil drums, and food rations for the 2-day trip. Despite departing late though, they were still planning to arrive in Tokelau Island by October 5th. So, when Apia Harbor got a message from Whakaofo port on October 6th saying that the ship was overdue, confusion and panic immediately crept into the atmosphere. Despite the ship being overdue, no ship or land based operator received a distress signal, and so, fearing the worst, a rescue mission was set out to find Joyita and her crew. And over the course of 6 days, they covered an area of roughly 100,000 miles. Despite the distance covered in the search of Joyita, no trace of her nor the crew could be seen. The rescue mission continued but on a much smaller scale than before, and it remained that way for 5 weeks. On November 10th, Gerald Douglas, captain of the merchant ship Tuvalu, was en route from Suva to Funafuti when he spotted something out in the distance. This object that Douglas saw was none other than the Joyita herself, drifting nearly 600 miles away from her original route, heading north of Vanuatu. Joyita was found partially submerged, listing severely to her right side with barnacle growth all along it, proving that it had been drifting like this for a while now. The recovery party was immediately notified, but when they arrived there, they found no signs of the crew or passengers. What I am about to tell you are the discoveries documented by the rescue party upon examining the ship. 4 tons of cargo was missing from the Joyita. There was damage to the superstructure. Alongside this, her flying bridge was smashed away and her deckhouse had light damage and shattered windows. A canvas awning had also been rigged on top of the deckhouse behind the bridge, but based on the photographs, looked to be tattered. The Joyita carried a lifeboat and 3 Carly life rafts, yet all of it was missing alongside the life vests despite there not being enough for everyone aboard the Joyita at the time. The starboard engine was found to be covered by mattresses, while the port engine's clutch was still partially disassembled, showing that the vessel was still running on only one engine. The starter motor of the starboard auxiliary engine was also missing, proving that that was no longer repairable. An auxiliary pump had been rigged in the engine room, mounted on a plank of wood, slung between the main engines, yet was not connected. The radio on board was tuned to the International Distress Channel, but when the equipment was inspected, a break was found in the cable between the set and the aerial. The cable had been painted over, obscuring the break. This would have limited the range of the radio to about 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers. What I find interesting about this point is the fact that in my mind, it seems that whoever painted over the break had some sort of malicious intent and purposely painted over the break in the cable to possibly commit some nefarious act or to try and hide something. At least that's what I had in my mind while researching. The electric clocks that were wired to the vessel's generator all stopped at 10:25, implying that whatever had happened occurred late at night. The ship's logbook, sextant, mechanical chronometer, and other navigational equipment, as well as the firearms Miller kept in the boat, were missing. However, Parsons' bag was found on deck containing a stethoscope, a scalpel, and 4 lengths of blood-stained bandages. Parson, if you'll remember, was the World War II surgeon. The fuel found in Joyita's tank showed the rescuers that she crossed 243 miles before the vessel was abandoned, probably within 50 miles of Tokelau. This is also where they got their information about it being possibly 10:25 at night when everything occurred. And although Joyita was found with her bilges and lower decks flooded, her hull was sound, and once the water was pumped from her hull, she floated on a stable and even keel and was easily towed into harbor at Suva. When at her mooring there, investigators heard the sound of water entering the vessel. It was found that a pipe in the raw water circuit of the port auxiliary engine's cooling system had failed due to galvanic corrosion, allowing water into the bilges. The first the crew would have known about the leak was when the water rose above the engine room floorboards, by which time it would have been nearly impossible to locate the leak. Also, the bilge pumps were not fitted with strainers and had become clogged with debris, meaning that it would have been very difficult to pump the water out. You see, strainers on a bilge pump are the reason why a bilge pump doesn't get clogged in the first place. The strainers are supposed to allow the water that stagnates in your boat to evacuate without the issue of debris getting stuck in the hose and or the pump itself. But since there seemed to be no strainers in the first place, it was only a matter of time before those pumps were clogged with debris or any sort of other dirt you can imagine would be floating in the ocean. But despite all these observations, no one really had an answer for the main question everyone was asking, that being, where did everyone go? And that's where the theories come in. The first one being very interesting for someone like myself who is fascinated with history. Since it was the 1950s and the Cold War had just begun to take shape, Americans immediately began pointing their fingers at their communist enemies. And so, some American news outlets proposed the idea that a Soviet submarine had swam by and kidnapped the crew of the Joyita. As far as I can tell, nothing really came of this theory, and there hasn't really been much development on it since. Another theory proposed by the Fiji Times suggested that the crew on the Joyita happened to float by a fleet of Japanese fishing boats, and after seeing something the crew wasn't supposed to see, was quickly silenced. This claim was mostly fueled by anti-Japanese sentiments in the Pacific due to the events of World War II, but Fiji had a deeper hatred towards them due to the fact that they were allowed to operate fishing fleets in their local waters. However, some theories suddenly gained credence when men clearing Joyita found knives that were stamped "Made in Japan." However, tests on the knives proved negative, and it turned out the knives were old and broken, quite possibly left on board from when Joyita was used for fishing in the late 1940s. Another theory suggests that the Straw Hat Pirates slammed the Thousand Sunny into the MV Joyita, killing all 25 crew members before stealing the 4 tons of cargo. Or it could be any other pirates that you can think of off the top of your head. But the point is, pirates might have done it. And whatever pirates did it, I don't know, but pirates, man. All of these theories are interesting, but some propose it was something less violent than what others were suggesting. This next theory is called the Injured Captain Hypothesis, and it suggests that while traveling, Captain Miller had either died or become incapacitated, causing everyone to start to freak out and escape via the life raft. Evidence for this is obviously the missing life rafts, but also the blood-stained bandages that were found inside Dr. Parsons' bag. However, this does not explain how 4 tons of cargo went missing. It's not like they just picked up the 4 tons of cargo and threw it on the life raft with them and then everyone jumped in and started rowing off. I mean, the life raft was sank by putting just a ton of cargo on there. But another theory alongside the same line suggested that Captain Miller and his first mate, whom he had had disagreements with recently, got into an altercation and in the process both fell overboard. And, in a state of panic, everyone jumped onto the life raft and began fleeing. Although that theory also has the same problems as the one I just said, where if that were the case and everyone jumped in the life rafts, what happened to the 4 tons of cargo? There also wasn't any damage to the boat to cause 4 tons of cargo just float out of it. It would have had to been them carrying it out, or something would have had to push the cargo out of the boat. And I don't know. These theories are very strange when considering the 4 tons of cargo. And also, I feel like there was something a little more malicious just based on the break between the cable and the aerial set on the radio that was just covered up by paint. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me, and comment down below if you have any other theories about why that is. However, we take a less wholesome approach. Wholesome, my bad, this story is not wholesome, but another theory proposes the idea of there being possible insurance fraud, since it was known that at the time, Miller had a lot of built-up debt caused by failed fishing trips on the Joyita. However, it would have been difficult to see the events surrounding Joyita as insurance fraud, given that no seacocks were found open, and the ship would be almost impossible to scuttle. You see, most cases that involve insurance fraud in this context rely on the crew to intentionally sink the ship in some way, shape, or form, this action being called scuttling. But since the Joyita was created in such a way for sinkage to be near impossible, scuttling the ship would also be near impossible. Alongside this, Miller was relying on Joyita being chartered for regular runs between Samoa and Tokelau, the government charters being a possible avenue for Miller to try and clear his debts. So, instead of trying to do something illegal, he would have just probably kept chartering stuff so that way he could pay off his debts over time with the government charters. But this theory also holds some credence, but I don't 100% agree with that. We'll get into that later, but the theory that most people tend to follow is simply called the mutiny hypothesis. A subsequent owner of Joyita, British author Robin Maugham? I don't know. Robin Maugham, whatever, spent several years researching the vessel's past and later published his findings as The Joyita Mystery in 1962. Maugham agreed that events were started by the flooding from the broken cooling pipe and the failure of the pumps themselves. The mattresses found covering the starboard engine were used either in an attempt to stem the leak or to protect the electrical switchboard from spray kicked up by the engine's flywheel as the water level rose. At the time, Joyita encountered increasingly heavy swells and squally weather. Captain Miller, knowing Joyita to be unsinkable and desperate to reach his destination and clear off some of his debt, pressed on. However, Simpson, who was the first mate, and possibly other crew members, demanded that he turn back. This effectively led to a mutiny, to which during the initial struggle, Miller sustained a serious injury. By now, the ship was entering heavier weather, with winds estimated to be around 40 miles per hour, and with one engine in a flooded bilge, it was beginning to labor. The flooding in the engine room would have eventually caused the starboard engine to fail, also cutting all the vessel's electrical power. Simpson, being the one in control now, made the decision to abandon ship, taking the navigational equipment, logbook, and supplies, as well as the injured Miller with them. It still seems unlikely that Simpson would choose to abandon a flooded but floating ship to take to small open rafts in the Pacific Ocean. Maugham proposed that they sight a nearby island or reef and try to reach it, but in the strong winds and seas, the rafts were carried out to sea, leaving Joyita drifting and empty. The damage to the lightly built superstructure was caused by wave damage while the vessel was drifting in the heavy seas. Now, after being provided with all that information, what do I believe happened? Well, I think aliens appeared over the Pacific Ocean at 10:25 at night, and the UFO caused the clocks to stop and all the power to cut out. There was a struggle as the aliens took them off the ship, but then the crew and passengers were lost to the vast cosmos. I'm joking, but in all seriousness, I believe the mutiny one has a lot of credence, but I'm more so inclined to believe that Captain Miller was simply injured, and with the flooding of the ship, everyone abandoned ship but sadly perished in their pursuit to find land. Of course, this would bring a tragic end to an otherwise strange story, but it's one that, at least in my mind, holds the most credence. And so, as many of you are asking, what happened to the Joyita after it was discovered? Joyita was auctioned off and repaired, but after several stories of Joyita being ran aground and repaired, she was finally abandoned by her owners, and by the early 1970s, disintegration had taken its hold on the ship. A few years later, on March 14, 1975, the Western Samoa Post Office released a set of 5 stamps dealing with the mystery of Joyita. Then, in 2009, a walkway was named after Dr. Alfred Dennis Parsons near his former Torbay home in Auckland, New Zealand. And finally, in 2012, the same year that all the crew and passengers were considered deceased, 2 memory stones in honor of the event were erected in Apia, Samoa, and Whakaofo Village, Tokelau, thus ending the story of the mystery of the MV Joyita. Thank you all for watching this video, it truly means a lot to me. I, as stated before, enjoy researching historical mysteries like this because I find the different theories and ideas that people propose as to what happened to be fascinating, and I like to try and see if I can come up with my own theories in response to given the information. Thank you all for the support on the Sandown Clown video and the Frogman video and all these other videos I've been making. It means a lot. Everything, I've been trying to lean more into historical stuff, and I'm hoping that with this video and hopefully a couple other ones, I can kind of do a balance of cryptid videos and urban legend videos with true historical mystery, so that way I can have a diverse set of content, so that way I'm not just posting the same thing over and over again. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day, night, morning, afternoon, whatever time it is, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.